The forgotten child, I still remember the day I arrived in that small, remote town in Colorado. It was late October, and the air was already biting cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you shiver no matter how many layers you wear. I had come all the way from Thailand to work as an au pair for a family I'd only spoken to over video calls. They seemed nice enough, polite, reserved, and eager to have someone help with their 10-year-old son, Eli. But from the moment I stepped into their house, something felt off. The parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove, were distant, almost robotic in their interactions with me. They showed me to my room, a small space at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway, and left me to unpack without so much as a smile. Eli, the boy I was supposed to care for, was nowhere to be seen. The first time I met Eli, I was struck by how unnaturally quiet he was. He didn't greet me or even look me in the eye. Instead, he sat by the window in the living room, staring out at the dense woods that surrounded the house. His pale face was expressionless, his dark eyes hollow, like he wasn't really there. I tried to engage him in conversation, asking about his hobbies or what he liked to do, but he only gave me one-word answers or ignored me altogether. The parents didn't seem concerned. "He's just shy," Mrs. Hargrove said, her voice flat, as if she'd repeated the phrase 1,000 times. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Over the next few days, I noticed how Eli would flinch whenever his parents entered the room, how he'd avoid their gaze and retreat into himself. It was as if he was carrying a weight too heavy for a child his age, and I couldn't help but wonder what they were hiding. The house itself was strange too. It was old, with creaky wooden floors and walls that seemed to absorb sound, making everything feel unnervingly quiet. The Hargroves rarely left, and when they did, they'd lock certain doors and give me strict instructions not to go into certain parts of the house. "Eli's room is off limits," Mr. Hargrove said one evening, his tone leaving no room for argument. "He needs his privacy." But privacy for what? The boy barely spoke, barely moved. He spent hours at that window, staring into the woods like he was waiting for something or someone. I started to notice little things, like how the parents would whisper to each other in the kitchen, their voices low and urgent, or how Eli would sometimes disappear for hours, only to reappear in the same spot by the window, as if he'd never left. It was unsettling, but I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe this was just how they were. Maybe I was the one who didn't understand. Then, one night, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere in the house. It was late, and everyone was supposed to be asleep. I followed the sound, my heart pounding, until I found myself standing in front of a door I'd never noticed before. It was tucked away at the end of the basement hallway, partially hidden behind a stack of old boxes. The tapping stopped as soon as I reached for the doorknob, and for a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. But then I noticed something else. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest, and what I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room was small, barely more than a closet, but every inch of the walls was covered in photographs. Dozens of them, all of young women. Some were smiling, others looked scared, but they all had one thing in common. They were au pairs. My stomach churned as I recognized a few faces from the agency's website. And then I saw it, a diary sitting on a dusty shelf in the corner. The name on the cover was Eli's. I grabbed the diary, my hands trembling, and flipped it open. The pages were filled with Eli's handwriting, small, neat, and eerily precise. But the words, they weren't the words of a child. They were detailed accounts of every au pair who had come before me, their habits, their fears, their secrets. Eli had been watching them, writing about them, as if he'd been instructed to. My stomach twisted as I read about how one girl had tried to leave after a week, only to disappear shortly after. Another had confronted the parents about Eli's behavior and was never seen again. The entries were cold, detached, like he was just documenting facts, but there was something else there, too. Something desperate. In one passage, he wrote, "I don't want to do this anymore, but they'll hurt me if I stop." My heart ached for him, but it was quickly overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. What had I walked into? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the diary, trying to make sense of it all. The next morning, I confronted Mrs. Hargrove, my voice shaking as I asked her about the room and the photos. Her face went pale, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she smiled, a cold, lifeless smile, and said, "You shouldn't have gone down there." Before I could respond, Mr. Hargrove appeared behind her, his expression unreadable. "Eli has a special role in this family," he said, his voice calm but menacing. "He helps us manage things. And now, so will you. I felt a chill run down my spine as Eli stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on me. For the first time, I saw something in them. Not emptiness, but fear. He knew what was coming, and so did I. The days that followed were a blur. The Hardrows became even more controlling, watching my every move, making sure I didn't step out of line. Eli, on the other hand, started acting differently around me. He'd linger in the hallway outside my room, his eyes darting around like he was afraid someone might see him. One afternoon, while his parents were out, he finally spoke to me. Really spoke. "You need to leave," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They're going to make you like the others." I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head, his hands trembling. "There's a key," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "In the kitchen drawer. It opens the back door. Wait until midnight, and then run. Don't look back." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I knew he was telling the truth. I could see the fear in his eyes, the way his small frame seemed to shrink under the weight of whatever he'd been forced to do. That night, I waited until the house was silent, the only sound the faint creaking of the old wooden beams. My heart pounded as I crept down the stairs, the key clutched tightly in my hand. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, like it was alive, watching me. When I reached the back door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock. What if they were waiting for me? What if this was some kind of test? But then I thought of Eli, of the fear in his voice, and I knew I had to try. I turned the key, the click echoing in the stillness, and pushed the door open. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the trees looming like shadows around me. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where I flagged down a passing car and begged for help. The police were skeptical at first. I must have looked like a mess, wild-eyed, out of breath, and babbling about a family and a boy in a house in the woods. But when I showed them the diary, their expressions changed. They took me to the station, asked me a million questions, and finally agreed to go to the house. By the time we got there, though, it was empty. The Hardrows were gone, and so was Eli. The only thing left behind was the room in the basement, the photos still covering the walls like some kind of twisted shrine. The police searched the house, but they didn't find anything else. No signs of where the family had gone or what had happened to the other au pairs. It was like they'd vanished in a thin air that I stayed in town for a few weeks, helping with the investigation, but nothing ever came of it. The Hardrows were never found, and neither was Eli. To this day, I don't know what happened to them or what they were really doing in that house. All I know is that I was lucky to get out when I did. Sometimes I still think about Eli, his quiet, haunted eyes, the way he tried to warn me. I hope he's okay, wherever he is. But I also know that some secrets are better left buried. That house, that family, and whatever they were hiding, it's something I'll never fully understand. And maybe that's for the best. After everything that happened, I couldn't stay in Colorado. I moved back to Thailand, trying to put as much distance between myself and that house as possible. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It started with small things, a shadow out of the corner of my eye, a faint tapping sound at night, like the one I'd heard in the basement. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination, the trauma of what I'd been through messing with my head. But then, one day, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in messy handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. It was of me, taken from outside my window, standing in the kitchen of my new apartment. My blood turned to ice as I realized someone had been there, watching me. Just like Eli had watched the others, I never found out who sent the photo or how they knew where I was. I moved again, changed my number, and did everything I could to disappear. But even now, years later, I still feel that same unease, like I'm never truly alone. I don't know if the Hardrows are still out there, if they're still looking for me, or if Eli ever escaped. All I know is that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some secrets, they follow you, no matter how far you run. The replacement, I moved to Vermont in the fall of 2022, fresh out of college and eager to start my new life as an au pair. The family I was matched with seemed perfect on paper. A couple in their late 30s with two sweet kids, a boy and a girl, living in a picturesque small town surrounded by forests. The parents, Sarah and Mark, were warm and welcoming when I first arrived, but there was something off. They kept mentioning their previous au pair, Priya, who had apparently died in a tragic car accident just a few months before. At first, I thought it was just grief talking, but the way they brought her up felt strange, almost obsessive. They'd say things like, Priya used to make the best chai, or Priya always knew how to calm the kids down. It was like they expected me to step into her shoes completely, as if I were some kind of replacement rather than my own person. The house itself was beautiful but eerie, with creaky wooden floors and old portraits lining the walls. My room was cozy, but it still had traces of Priya, her favorite scarf left hanging on the back of the door, a half-used notebook on the desk. I tried to ignore it at first, but things started getting weird almost immediately. One night, I woke up to the sound of faint whispering outside my door. I opened it, but no one was there. The next morning, I found one of my sweaters missing, only to discover it later in the laundry room, folded neatly but smelling faintly of incense, something I never used. Then there were the notes, tiny scraps of paper with symbols I didn't recognize, tucked into random places like my pillowcase or the pocket of my coat. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the stress of adjusting to a new place, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The kids, Emma and Liam, were sweet but distant, like they were holding back around me. Emma, the older one, would sometimes stare at me with this unsettling intensity, as if she were waiting for me to do something specific. One afternoon, while we were coloring together, she suddenly said, Priya used to draw elephants for me. Can you draw one? Her voice was soft, but there was a weird edge to it, like it wasn't really a request. I tried to brush it off and drew an elephant, but she just frowned and said that's not how she did it. It was small things like that, little comments, odd looks that started to pile up and make me feel like I was constantly being compared to someone I could never measure up to. The whispers became more frequent, especially at night. I'd hear them faintly, like someone was having a conversation just out of earshot. At first, I thought it was the wind or the house settling. But the more it happened, the more I became convinced it was something else. One night, I decided to follow the sound. I crept out of my room and down the hallway, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The whispers led me to the basement door, which was slightly ajar. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed not to go down there, but curiosity got the better of me. As I descended the stairs, the air grew colder and the whispers stopped. That's when I saw it. A small altar in the corner with candles, flowers, and a framed photo of Priya. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just a memorial. It felt like something else, something darker. I backed away, my heart pounding, and ran back to my room, locking the door behind me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just grief. Something was very, very wrong. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the image of that altar. Sarah noticed I was quieter than usual and asked if everything was okay. I lied and said I was just tired, but the way she looked at me, like she was studying my face for something, made my skin crawl. Later that day, while the kids were at school, I decided to do some digging. I started with Priya's room, which was now my room. I went through the desk drawers and found more of those strange notes, along with a journal tucked under a pile of old textbooks. The journal was filled with Priya's handwriting, but it wasn't in English or Hindi. It was in the same symbols I'd seen on the notes. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, trying to make sense of it. Near the end, there was a drawing of the altar I'd seen in the basement, surrounded by what looked like instructions or a ritual. My blood ran cold. What had they done to her? That night, I confronted Sarah and Mark. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked them about the altar and the journal. At first, they denied everything, but when I showed them the journal, their faces changed. Sarah started crying, and Mark looked away, his jaw tight. We didn't mean for it to happen, Sarah said, her voice breaking. We just wanted her to stay. We love her like family. My stomach churned as the pieces started to come together. Priya hadn't died in a car accident. She had taken her own life. And from the looks of it, Sarah and Mark had been trying to bring her back, using some kind of ritual they didn't fully understand. They had been trying to replace her with me, not just as an au pair, but as something more. I felt sick. I wasn't just living in Priya's shadow. I was being pulled into it, whether I wanted to or not that I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every whisper in the dark, felt like a warning. I packed my bags quietly, planning to leave first thing in the morning. But when I went downstairs, Sarah was already in the kitchen, making breakfast like nothing was wrong. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're not thinking of leaving, are you?" she asked, her tone light, but with an edge that made my stomach twist. I lied and said I was just organizing my things, but I could tell she didn't believe me. The atmosphere in the house shifted after that, subtle but unmistakable. The kids started acting stranger too. Liam would stare at me without blinking. and Emma began leaving little drawings of me around the house, always with a shadowy figure standing behind me. It was like they were trying to tell me something or warn me. The final straw came when I found another note, this time in my own handwriting. It said, "Don't leave. You belong here now." My hands shook as I stared at it. I didn't remember writing it, but the words were unmistakably mine. That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with a grieving family. I was dealing with something much darker, something that had been in this house long before Priya or me. I knew I had to get out, but every time I tried to leave, something stopped me. The car wouldn't start, or the front door would jam, or I'd get this overwhelming feeling of dread that made me turn back. It was like the house itself didn't want me to leave. And then, one night, I heard Priya's voice. It was faint, but clear. "Help me." I froze when I heard her voice. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was clear, desperate, and coming from the basement. My first instinct was to run, but something in her tone made me hesitate. It wasn't threatening. It was pleading. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs. The basement was colder than before, and the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. The altar was still there, but the candles were lit, even though I hadn't touched them. The photo of Priya was turned face down, and the journal was open to a page I hadn't seen before. This time, the symbols were accompanied by English translations. It was a ritual, but not one to bring someone back. It was a ritual to trap someone, to bind them to the house. My heart raced as I realized what they had done to Priya and what they were trying to do to me, and I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Sarah standing at the bottom of the stairs. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide, almost frantic. "You shouldn't be down here," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not safe." I backed away, clutching the journal to my chest. "What did you do to her?" I demanded. Sarah's expression crumpled, and she started crying again. "We didn't mean to hurt her," she said. "We just wanted her to stay. We wanted her to be part of our family forever." My stomach turned as I realized the truth. They had driven Priya to suicide, and then they had tried to keep her spirit here, trapped in this house. And now, they were trying to do the same to me. I knew I had to get out, but Sarah blocked the stairs. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't leave us. We need you." I didn't know what to do. Sarah was blocking the only way out, and the air in the basement felt like it was getting heavier, harder to breathe. That's when I heard Priya's voice again, louder this time. "Break it," she said. I looked around, confused, until my eyes landed on the altar. The candles, the photo, the journal. It was all part of whatever ritual they had used to trap her. Without thinking, I grabbed the photo and threw it against the wall. The glass shattered, and Sarah screamed, "No!" But it was too late. The candles blew out on their own, and the air suddenly felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Sarah collapsed to the floor, sobbing, and I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran up the stairs, grabbed my bags, and bolted out the front door. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of town, where I called a taxi to take me to the nearest bus station. As I sat on the bus, staring out the window, I couldn't stop thinking about Priya. I didn't know if breaking the altar had freed her or if she was still trapped in that house, but I knew I couldn't go back. I changed my number, deleted my social media, and never spoke to Sarah or Mark again. To this day, I don't know if they were just a grieving family who lost their way or if there was something darker at play. We moved quickly, silently, through the basement. The weight of the woman's frail body in my arms made it hard to move as fast as I needed. I had no plan other than to get out. But as I reached the door, it opened. There, standing in the dim light of the hallway, was Daniel. For a moment, neither of us moved. My mind screamed to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. Daniel's expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on me, then flicking to the woman in my arms. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. In that instant, I knew I had no choice. I had to act. I bolted past him, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I didn't know where I was going, just away from him. I heard him yell after me, but I didn't stop. I ran out of the house, through the garden, not looking back. That I didn't stop until I reached the street. I didn't know where to go, but I couldn't stay there. I flagged down a car, and the driver, seeing the fear in my eyes, took us to the nearest police station. The police went to the house. They found everything Daniel had been hiding. The woman in the basement was identified as the previous au pair. She had been there for months, living in isolation, forced to work in secret. Daniel and Catherine were arrested that night. That I still don't understand everything that happened. I don't know what drove them to do it, but I know one thing for sure. There was evil lurking behind that perfect facade, and I'm lucky to have escaped it. The perfect family facade. I arrived in Beverly Hills in the summer of 2019, fresh out of Poland and eager to start a new chapter in my life. I had always dreamed of traveling, and working as an au pair seemed like the perfect opportunity. The Kowalskis, yes, ironically, they had a Polish surname, were my host family. From the moment I stepped into their pristine, modern mansion, I felt like I had walked into a magazine spread. The parents, Daniel and Catherine, were the definition of perfection. Wealthy, good-looking, and endlessly polite. Their children, Lily, 8, and Jacob, 6, were eerily well-mannered, always speaking in soft, measured tones and never, ever acting out. It felt too perfect, but at the time, I chalked it up to rich people parenting that it wasn't until my second week that I started noticing little things that didn't add up. The kids always waited for permission before doing anything, eating, speaking, even playing. At first, I thought it was just strict discipline, but there was something off about the way they glanced at each other before answering my questions, as if silently coordinating their responses. The parents, despite being so devoted to their perfect family, never ate meals with us. Every evening, Catherine would prepare these elaborate dinners, but she and Daniel would take their plates to their study, leaving me with the kids. And then there was the basement door. It was the only part of the house that I wasn't allowed to enter, locked at all times with a thick, silver deadbolt. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I decided to grab a late-night snack from the kitchen. As I tiptoed down the hallway, the house was eerily silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. But then I heard it, something so subtle at first that I almost dismissed it. A muffled sound, low and strained, coming from somewhere beneath me. I froze, my heart pounding. It was coming from the basement. I inched closer to the locked door, pressing my ear against the cold wood. The sound was unmistakable now, a weak, desperate whimper, like someone trying to cry, but too exhausted to make a full sob. My stomach twisted that I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was an old pipe groaning or the wind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. My hands were trembling as I reached for the doorknob, even though I already knew it would be locked. Just as my fingers brushed against the cold metal, a sudden creak echoed behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Daniel stood in the dim hallway, his expression unreadable. "Is everything all right, Kasia?" he asked, his voice smooth, casual. But his eyes held something else entirely. I quickly forced a smile, my pulse racing. "Yes, everything's fine," I said, my voice betraying the panic I was trying to hide. Daniel didn't seem convinced. He stepped closer, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary, before glancing at the basement door. "I hope you didn't hear anything strange," he said, his tone now colder, more measured. My heart skipped a beat, but I nodded. "No, just the house settling," I replied, hoping my voice didn't crack. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, but then he offered a tight-lipped smile and nodded. "Good," he said, and then, without another word, turned and walked back down the hallway. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind reeling. There was no way that was a coincidence. He had known exactly what I was about to do. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I returned to my room, the muffled cries from the basement echoed in my mind, louder and clearer than ever before. The next day, when the kids were at school, I couldn't resist any longer. I had to know what was really behind that door. The house was eerily quiet that afternoon, the silence wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. I had been careful, pretending to clean the kitchen while my thoughts raced. I couldn't shake the image of Daniel's eyes from the night before. Cold, calculating, almost predatory. The basement door loomed ahead, its lock mocking me. I waited, watching the clock tick away. When I was sure no one would be around, I crept toward the door, my breath shallow with anticipation. I had to know what was down there. I grabbed a paperclip from the desk and straightened it with shaky hands. It was a desperate move, but I couldn't think of any other way. The lock gave with a sickening click, and my pulse spiked. I pushed the door open, and immediately, the air hit me, stale, heavy, and thick with the scent of dust and something else I couldn't place. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside, the dim light from the hallway casting long shadows across the basement floor. The space was larger than I expected, with shelves lined with old boxes and what appeared to be discarded furniture. But it was the far corner that made my stomach churn. There, hidden behind a stack of old chairs, was a small, makeshift bed. The blankets were tattered, and the walls were covered with marks, scratches, like someone had been desperately trying to escape. My mind reeled as I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. And that's when I saw her. She was huddled in the corner, her frail body barely visible in the dim light. At first, I thought she was just a shadow, a trick of the mind, but then her head slowly turned toward me. Her eyes were wide, sunken, and glazed with a kind of fear that made my stomach twist. She didn't move, she couldn't. Her limbs were shackled to the wall, her wrists raw and red from the chains. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a surge of panic. This wasn't just a strange coincidence. This wasn't just an accident. Who are you? I whispered, my voice trembling. She barely seemed to register the question, her lips cracked and dry. But then her gaze locked onto mine with a desperate intensity. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. "Help," she gasped. "Please, help me." My hands shook as I reached for the chains, but as I touched them, I heard it, the sound of footsteps above. Quick, hurried. Daniel. My heart leaped into my throat. I had no choice. I couldn't leave her here, not after everything I'd seen. But I also knew if I was caught, my fate would be sealed. That I froze for a moment, weighing my options. The basement door creaked as it began to close on its own, and my heart stopped. I turned back to the woman, my mind racing. "I'll be back," I whispered, though I knew I might never be. I forced myself to move, my legs like jelly as I stumbled back toward the door. The moment I stepped into the hallway, I could feel Daniel's presence behind me, but I didn't turn. I couldn't. I had made my decision. I had to help her. That I ran up the stairs as quietly as I could, my heart thundering in my chest. I couldn't risk looking back. My mind raced through 1,000 thoughts, each one more terrifying than the last. The basement door had closed on its own, but I could feel Daniel's eyes on me. I knew he'd be suspicious. I had to act fast. I told myself I'd find a way to come back for her. I had I entered the kitchen, I froze. Daniel was standing there, his back to me, flipping through a stack of papers on the counter. The moment he turned, I saw the coldness in his eyes again, the same look he had given me the night before. "Everything all right, Kasia?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost too casual. I nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yes, just tired," I stammered. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze lingering. "Good. I'd hate to think you were overworking yourself." There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. I was certain now that he knew. I could almost feel his thoughts turning, calculating, like a predator playing with its prey. "Are you hungry?" he asked suddenly, a bit too kindly. "I could prepare something for you." I shook my head, suddenly feeling nauseous. "I'm fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't push further. But as I made my way to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. Every move I made felt like a step toward danger, and every part of me screamed to run. That night, I barely slept. The woman in the basement haunted me, her eyes full of terror, her whispered plea for help echoing in my mind. I knew I couldn't go back there during the day, not with Daniel so close. But I also knew I couldn't leave her locked away. The fear of what would happen if I didn't act gnawed at me. And yet, the terror of getting caught by Daniel felt like a suffocating weight. Every minute felt like it could be my last. The next day, I kept my distance from the family. I pretended everything was normal, keeping the kids occupied while my mind raced with plans. When night fell, I waited for the house to settle into its usual silence. The sound of the kids' soft breathing as they slept made the house feel impossibly quiet, like the calm before a storm. I slipped out of my room, my hands cold and clammy as I crept downstairs toward the basement. This time I was more careful. I moved quickly, knowing that every second mattered. The door to the basement creaked open, the smell of dust and mildew hitting me again. I barely noticed it this time. My heart was focused on one thing, getting her out. I rushed to her side, the chains still holding her in place. But her eyes lit up with a faint glimmer of hope when she saw me, that I quickly fumbled with the lock, my hand shaking. It was harder than I thought. My breath quickened with panic. I heard a faint sound, footsteps. The floorboards creaked above me. I could hear Daniel moving around. The sweat on my brow was cold, and I felt my heart race as the lock finally gave way. Her chains fell to the ground with a soft clink, and she collapsed into my arms. We moved quickly, silently, through the basement. The weight of the woman's frail body in my arms made it hard to move as fast as I needed. I had no plan other than to get out. But as I reached the door, it opened. There, standing in the dim light of the hallway, was Daniel. For a moment, neither of us moved. My mind screamed to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. Daniel's expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on me, then flicking to the woman in my arms. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. In that instant, I knew I had no choice. I had to act. I bolted past him, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I didn't know where I was going, just away from him. I heard him yell after me, but I didn't stop. I ran out of the house, through the garden, not looking back. That I didn't stop until I reached the street. I didn't know where to go, but I couldn't stay there. I flagged down a car, and the driver, seeing the fear in my eyes, took us to the nearest police station. The police went to the house. They found everything Daniel had been hiding. The woman in the basement was identified as the previous au pair. She had been there for months, living in isolation, forced to work in secret. Daniel and Catherine were arrested that night. That I still don't understand everything that happened. I don't know what drove them to do it, but I know one thing for sure. There was evil lurking behind that perfect facade, and I'm lucky to have escaped it.